I'm 32M, and I've been with my wife Sarah, 29F, for 5 years. We got married recently, and I thought that would mean finally being fully accepted into her family. But from the moment I met them, it was obvious I was always going to be on the outside looking in. Sarah's family isn't the type to be openly hostile. There were no insults or dramatic confrontations. Instead, they operated with quiet exclusion, like I was an afterthought, someone they barely tolerated because Sarah loved me. Her mom, mother-in-law, and older sister, sister-in-law were the worst. Mother-in-law had this polite but cold way of speaking to me, and sister-in-law barely acknowledged my existence unless Sarah was in the room. Sarah always brushed it off. "They're just forgetful," she said. "They don't mean anything by it." I tried to believe that. The first time I really noticed something was off was when I found out about a family dinner, after it had already happened. Sarah and I had been talking in the kitchen, and she casually mentioned how her mom made her favorite pasta at dinner the other night. "What dinner?" I asked. She hesitated, then quickly said, "Oh, it was just a last-minute thing. My mom probably forgot to tell you." It didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. Then it happened again. And again. I wasn't in the family group chat. I wasn't included in discussions about birthdays or holiday plans. When Sarah's parents planned a weekend getaway, she was invited, but I wasn't. Mother-in-law had a smooth excuse every time. "Oh, we didn't think you'd be interested, or we planned it so quickly. We forgot." At first I told myself I was overreacting, but patterns don't lie. The breaking point came when Sarah's sister got married. It was a small wedding, family only, and I wasn't invited. Sarah was upset. "I don't know why she wouldn't include you," she admitted. But when she asked mother-in-law, the response was predictable. "It's just immediate family." That was a lie. Other in-laws were there, sister-in-law's husband's brother and his wife, Sarah's cousin's spouses. But me, not even considered. Sarah still went. That stung. I told her, "They don't see me as family, and you letting this slide isn't helping." She got defensive at first. "I can't control what they do," she argued. "I don't want to start drama." But she knew I was right. The final straw came when I overheard Sarah on the phone, talking about a family vacation. "Our flights are booked," she said. I wasn't aware of any trip. When I asked her, she looked guilty. "They invited me." I didn't know how to bring it up. I asked why I wasn't included. She sighed. "My mom said it's a family tradition, just parents and kids. A tradition that somehow included sister-in-law's husband but not me." I told Sarah, "You're free to go, but if you do, you're showing me exactly where I stand." Mother-in-law caught wind of our conversation and tried to guilt-trip me. "You're putting Sarah in an impossible position. Why are you making her choose?" I told her the truth. "I'm not making her choose. You are. All I want is basic respect." Sarah was torn, but deep down, she knew it wasn't right. That's when I decided to stop arguing. No more hoping things would change. No more waiting for an invitation that wasn't coming. Instead, I started paying attention. Every exclusion, every accidental oversight, every excuse. When I found out they had another family dinner without me, I didn't even bother confronting mother-in-law. I just smiled. Because now, I had a plan. They wanted to act like I wasn't part of the family. Fine, but they were about to learn what happens when you repeatedly forget someone exists. I stopped trying. No more asking about family gatherings. No more bringing up vacations or holidays. No more pretending I didn't notice when Sarah's family forgot about me. I told Sarah she could handle her family however she wanted, but I wouldn't go anywhere unless I was personally invited. No more secondhand invites through her. She noticed the change right away. One night, she asked if I was upset. I told her I was just done forcing my way in, where I clearly wasn't wanted. That was it. No arguments. No long discussion. Just a simple fact. A couple of weeks later, Sarah's cousin threw a birthday party. I only found out because Sarah mentioned it while getting ready. I stayed on the couch. She hesitated before asking, "You're not coming?" I shrugged. "Did anyone invite me?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she left. At the party, I came up in conversation. Sarah's cousins, who had always been polite to me, asked why I wasn't there. One of them casually mentioned the family group chat. Sarah must have realized at that moment I wasn't in it. Later that night, she told me what happened. When she asked her mom about it, mother-in-law made some weak excuse. She thought I wouldn't be interested. The cousins gave her a few looks but didn't press. That was fine. I didn't need them to push. I had my own plans. A few days later, I organized a dinner with my side of the family. Nothing extravagant, just a casual meal. Sarah was invited, of course, but I didn't make a big deal about it. When she arrived, she saw something she wasn't used to. Everyone treating me like I belonged. My family asked about my work, my hobbies, my life. Conversations flowed. No one forgot I existed. She sat quietly for most of the night. Then mother-in-law found out about the dinner. She suddenly acted interested. She brought it up to Sarah, saying she wished she had been invited. I kept my response casual. "Oh, I assumed you'd be too busy." That shut her up real quick. At the next family gathering, Sarah's uncle, one of the few who wasn't completely under mother-in-law's thumb, called her out. "Why do you keep forgetting OP? He's your son-in-law." Mother-in-law laughed it off. She mumbled something about how busy things had been, how she meant to include me. The excuse wasn't convincing, but Sarah heard it, and this time, she didn't look so sure about defending her mom. Then came the family trip. Sarah made her choice. She went without me. I didn't argue. I didn't try to make her feel bad. I just noted it. Instead of staying home and sulking, I had a great weekend with my own friends and family. I made sure to post about it, not to be petty, but because I was genuinely having a good time. Mother-in-law saw. On one of Sarah's trip photos, mother-in-law left a comment. Too bad OP couldn't make it. That was funny to me. Sarah came home from the trip looking drained. At first she tried to downplay it, insisting that her family didn't mean any harm. But as she talked, her frustration grew. It's like they don't even realize how messed up this is, she muttered. Over the next few days she was quieter than usual, more distant when talking to her mom. Then one night she admitted it. I can't keep defending this. I see it now. But even then she hesitated, torn between her family and the truth. I told her, you don't have to choose, but I can't keep pretending this isn't happening. She didn't argue, but she still looked uncertain. Change wasn't immediate, but it had started. A few days later, mother-in-law extended an olive branch, a casual dinner invitation. I accepted, but I wasn't coming unprepared. I wasn't walking into that dinner empty-handed. Before heading over, I picked up a framed photo of Sarah and me on our wedding day. A simple, elegant picture, just us, smiling, happy. I knew mother-in-law well enough by now. This wasn't an invitation out of kindness. It was an image control move. She wanted to smooth things over just enough to keep up appearances. So I decided to play along. When we arrived, I handed her the photo, watching as she took it with a tight-lipped smile. She held it like it was something breakable, like she wasn't sure what to do with it. Oh, for the family wall, I added, since I noticed there weren't any pictures of us there. Mother-in-law's fingers gripped the frame a little harder. She didn't have an excuse ready for that one. Inside, the seating was already arranged. Sarah sat near the middle of the table, surrounded by immediate family. My seat, way at the end. Not even next to Sarah. Not even with the main group. It wasn't a mistake. I pulled out the chair and laughed, loud enough for the room to hear. Guess I'm at the forgotten in-laws section, I said, sliding into the seat. Silence. A couple of Sarah's cousins glanced at each other. One of them covered a smirk with their napkin. Mother-in-law forced a chuckle. Oh, we just put names down quickly. No big deal. I nodded. No worries. I'm used to being left out. More silence. Sarah shifted in her seat. She looked at her mother, then at me, and back again. Something clicked for her right then. Dinner started, but the mood had changed. People were whispering. Mother-in-law kept stealing glances in my direction every time someone brought up family events. Then Sarah's uncle, the same one who had called mother-in-law out before, leaned forward. So, OP, he said, taking a sip of his drink. You in the family group chat yet? Dead silence. Sarah's cousins looked up. Mother-in-law froze. She cleared her throat, forcing a smile. Oh well, you know event planning is complicated. Things slip through the cracks. I took out my phone. Slowly, deliberately. Good thing I kept track of every time I was forgotten, I said. Want me to read the list? Mother-in-law's face drained of color. Sarah's uncle laughed. That's a long list of accidents, he said, shaking his head. Mother-in-law glared at him. Father-in-law, trying to save face, jumped in quickly. Well, OP is here now, so let's enjoy the evening. I set my phone down and leaned back. Of course, I said, but since there seems to be some confusion about whether or not I'm family, Sarah and I decided to clear things up. We'll be hosting a real family dinner soon, one that includes both sides. Mother-in-law visibly stiffened. Would love to see everyone there, I continued, casually. After all, we wouldn't want anyone to feel left out, right? A few cousins snickered. Mother-in-law had no way out. She forced a smile, nodding like she thought it was a great idea. But her fingers were gripping her napkin a little too hard. Then Sarah did something unexpected. She looked her mother in the eye and said, "It's time we stop pretending OP isn't part of this family." Mother-in-law's smile twitched. That was the moment I knew we had won this round. On the drive home, Sarah was quiet at first. Then she spoke. "Thanks for standing up for yourself," she said. "For us." She didn't need to say anything else. For the first time, mother-in-law realized there were consequences. She wouldn't be forgetting this moment anytime soon. The invitations went out. This time, no one could say they forgot. Sarah and I invited both sides of the family to our home for a formal dinner. A real family gathering, one that didn't leave anyone out. Mother-in-law saw the message in the family chat. Her response? A dry, "Oh wow, how thoughtful." I didn't reply. No point in engaging. The invite was clear, and she couldn't pretend she didn't see it. A couple of days later, word got around that mother-in-law was complaining to relatives. She felt weird about coming, didn't know what to expect, didn't feel comfortable. Sarah found out. She didn't hold back. She told her mother straight up. Skipping this dinner would be an obvious snub. Everyone was invited. Everyone was expected to show up. Mother-in-law had no excuses. So, she came. But she wasn't happy about it. The night of the dinner, everything was set up perfectly. No forgotten seating arrangements this time. The table was arranged so that Sarah and I were at the center, with both families spread out evenly. No weird little corners. No spots at the end of the table. Mother-in-law and father-in-law arrived together. Mother-in-law's smile was forced, but she plastered it on anyway. Father-in-law nodded at me, staying neutral. Still, barely even looked in my direction. Didn't bother me. Dinner started. Conversations flowed. My family was warm, engaging, making jokes, asking about Sarah and me. Mother-in-law was stiff, barely contributing. Then, when things got a little too quiet, I dropped it. It's great to have a full family gathering where no one is forgotten. Mother-in-law nearly choked on her drink. Sarah's cousins jumped in immediately. Yeah, finally, right? One of them grinned, looking at mother-in-law. Another chuckled, clearly enjoying the moment. Mother-in-law set her glass down. Her shoulders tightened. Well, she started. I've never been great at planning things. Sometimes I just forget. I didn't even need to say anything. Father-in-law sighed. Loud enough for the table to hear, he muttered. Or maybe you just didn't want to invite him. The whole table went dead silent. Mother-in-law stiffened. Her jaw clenched. She looked at father-in-law like she wanted to kill him. Sarah watched the whole exchange. Something in her changed right then. Mother-in-law forced a weak smile. I guess I should try harder to include you. I just nodded. I let the silence do the work for me. Because this time, mother-in-law was the one sitting in discomfort. After the dinner, mother-in-law started testing the waters. She made a few subtle attempts at conversation, asking Sarah how I was doing, making sure I overheard her mentioning me in passing. Then, slowly, she ramped it up. A few smiley face texts, a casual comment under one of Sarah's photos. It wasn't genuine. It was calculated. And I wasn't biting. It was all fake. But I played along. A few days later, Sarah got a message from her mom. Maybe OP should be in the family chat after all. What do you think? It wasn't an apology. It was a calculated move. Sarah replied, if you want him in, add him yourself. Hours later, I got the notification. No welcome message, no acknowledgement, just a quiet, reluctant addition, as if she could pretend everything was fine now. Sarah saw it too. She didn't say anything, just gave me a look. We both knew exactly what this was. Mother-in-law wasn't apologizing. She was just trying to rewrite history. I stayed in the chat, didn't post, didn't react, just let it sit. Then, a few weeks later, mother-in-law pulled her next move. It started with a big announcement in the chat, a family vacation. She made a huge deal about inviting me. Everyone's coming. It'll be so much fun, she said. We really want to include OP this time. Sounded good, until I got the details. The hotel was already booked. The rooms were set, and somehow there just wasn't space for me. Mother-in-law assured me it wasn't intentional. We can figure something out, she said. You can just stay at a different hotel nearby. I didn't respond. I just turned to Sarah. She put her phone down, stood up, and called mother-in-law directly. Sarah didn't hold back. She told her mother straight up. If I wasn't staying with the family, she wasn't going. Mother-in-law tried to scramble, backtracking, saying maybe they could work something out, but it was too late. Sarah's message was clear. If I wasn't included fully, neither was she. The moment Sarah pulled out, the whole trip started falling apart. Without her, a couple of cousins backed out. Then, father-in-law hesitated, and suddenly mother-in-law's perfect little plan was crumbling. A day later, father-in-law called me. Mother-in-law was upset. She felt like Sarah was choosing me over family. I laughed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mother-in-law had spent years pushing me out. Now, she was getting a taste of it herself. Then sister-in-law lost it. Out of nowhere, she sent a nasty message in the chat. She called me manipulative, said I was turning Sarah against her family, that I was ruining traditions. Sarah saw the message. She left the chat immediately. And then, for the first time, she cut sister-in-law off completely. Mother-in-law must have realized how badly she was losing control because she called me directly. Tried to sound calm, pretended to be remorseful. Let's not make this a bigger deal than it is. I let her talk. Then I said, no apology needed. Just actions that prove I'm actually part of this family. Then I hung up. That was the last time mother-in-law tried to play her little games with me. Weeks went by with silence from mother-in-law. Then out of nowhere, she invited Sarah and me to dinner at her house. That had never happened before. Not once. Sarah saw the invite first and showed it to me. We both knew she was up to something, but we accepted. I wanted to see what her next move was. The first thing I noticed when we walked in, my photo was on the family wall. It hadn't been there before. It was a cheap attempt at damage control. The frame was smaller than the others, squeezed in awkwardly between pictures of vacations and birthday parties I hadn't been invited to. Sarah glanced at it but didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We both knew exactly what mother-in-law was doing. Mother-in-law greeted us with over-the-top enthusiasm. She offered me food multiple times, making sure to serve me first. Acting like the perfect host. Laughing too much. Smiling too wide. She was overcompensating. Then came the slip-up. At one point, she laughed a little too hard and joked, "Gotta be careful now, or OP might expose me again." Father-in-law coughed into his drink. A few cousins awkwardly looked away. I just smirked. Mother-in-law realized what she had said and quickly changed the subject. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't actually changing. She was just scared of being embarrassed again. And that meant I had already won. Sister-in-law had been growing more distant ever since Sarah started standing up to their mother. At first, it was subtle. Short responses in their chats, skipping out on casual invites. But when Sarah called out their mother at dinner, she snapped. "You've changed," she told Sarah, and not in a good way. She wasn't just mad at me anymore. She is mad that Sarah wasn't playing along. Didn't change anything for me. On the way home, Sarah let out a long sigh. "I don't even recognize my mom anymore," she said. "She's trying so hard, but I can tell she doesn't mean it." I nodded. "People like her don't change," I said. "They just adjust when they lose power." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded too. She understood now. A week later, we made an announcement. Sarah and I were going on a vacation with my family. Mother-in-law heard about it through the group chat and lost her mind. She sent a private message to Sarah, "But we always do family vacations together." Sarah didn't even hesitate. Now you know how OP felt all these years. Mother-in-law had no response. She tried one last guilt trip, told Sarah she was breaking family tradition, that she was choosing me over them. But this time, Sarah didn't care, and just like that, the final shift happened. Mother-in-law realized she no longer controlled Sarah. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the one who changed everything. For the next few weeks, mother-in-law flipped the script. She was suddenly overly friendly. She sent me messages about random things, weather updates, funny memes, even an invitation to grab coffee. I ignored most of it. She started tagging me in family posts. Old photos, inside jokes from gatherings I was never included in. It was obvious what she was trying to do. She was trying to rewrite history, trying to make it look like there was never a problem. I didn't respond. I just watched. Then one day she dropped her next move. A family dinner, one she made sure to mention loudly in the group chat. But this time, a few relatives hesitated. "Wait, did OP get invited this time?" someone asked. I smirked. The cracks in her control were finally showing. So we went. The moment we walked in, I knew exactly what was happening. Mother-in-law was introducing me to extended family like I was a guest, laughing, smother-in-lawing, acting like I'd always been part of things. She hugged me in front of everyone, like she was proving a point. A few older relatives, ones who had never been involved in the drama, greeted me warmly. One of them even said, "Oh, so this is OP. I've heard so much about you." I bet they had. Mother-in-law made sure to keep the energy light. She laughed a little too hard, kept saying how great it was to have everyone together again. Then, during dinner, she said it. "It's great to have the whole family together again, without any of that unnecessary tension." I exchanged a glance with Sarah. There it was. The gaslighting attempt. Act like the problem never existed. Pretend nothing had ever happened. Sweep it under the rug. I didn't take the bait, but someone else did. One of Sarah's aunts, completely unaware of the full history, smiled and said, "Oh, I heard there were issues with OP being left out. Glad that's all in the past." Mother-in-law froze. The table went quiet. I chuckled, leaning back. "Yeah, it was strange how often I got forgotten. Glad that won't happen again." Mother-in-law's smile tightened. Father-in-law sighed and muttered, "Good thing you called it out, huh?" Mother-in-law glared at him, but it was too late. The truth was slipping out, and people were starting to notice. Then, out of nowhere, sister-in-law snapped. She slammed her fork down and blurted, "It's not like we hate you." A few people looked up, surprised. I didn't react. I just asked, "Then why did you keep excluding me?" She opened her mouth, closed it, stammered something about tradition. It wasn't an answer, because there wasn't one. That's when Sarah had enough. She set her napkin down and said, "Mom, you and sister-in-law treated OP like an outsider. We're done pretending it was an accident." Mother-in-law's face went pale. For the first time, someone called her out in front of the whole family. She had no response. She tried one last move. She sighed dramatically, touched her forehead, and claimed she wasn't feeling well. The classic victim escape. She stood up from the table and left the room. Sarah and I just exchanged glances. We didn't have to say anything. We had already won. After the disaster at the last dinner, Mill went completely silent. No passive-aggressive messages, no fake pleasantries, nothing. Sarah checked in once, just to see if her mom would acknowledge what happened. Mother-in-law didn't respond. I told her to leave it alone. Mother-in-law wasn't going to change. She was just regrouping. A few days later, sister-in-law had a full-blown meltdown on social media. She posted one of those vague, bitter rants about people who marry in and think they own the family. Sarah showed it to me. I laughed. It was so obvious. Sarah didn't hesitate. She commented directly under the post. "You mean people who just want basic respect?" The post was deleted within minutes. Meanwhile, the extended family started choosing sides. Some relatives stuck by mother-in-law. Others reached out to Sarah privately. A few even messaged me, saying they saw through everything. One of her cousins put it bluntly, "Your mom and sister-in-law did this to themselves. OP just exposed what was already broken." Then something surprising happened. At a different family gathering, one Sarah and I actually wanted to attend, father-in-law pulled me aside. He didn't say much, just a quiet, simple acknowledgement. "For what it's worth, I think you handled all this the right way." Then he walked away. I didn't question it, but I noted it. Father-in-law had spent years staying silent while mother-in-law pulled her stunts. Now, even he was starting to see it. Mother-in-law stopped inviting me again, but this time, Sarah refused to go without me. Every time mother-in-law planned something, Sarah responded the same way. "If OP isn't welcome, I'm not coming. Mother-in-law quickly realized she wasn't pushing me out. She was losing Sarah. That's when the real damage control started. Mother-in-law started telling anyone who would listen that I had turned Sarah against her. I didn't engage. I didn't need to. All I did was live my life. And the more mother-in-law lost control, the more obvious it became. Then came sister-in-law's final tantrum. Through the family grapevine, I heard that sister-in-law was furious. She was blaming me for mother-in-law being pushed out of family events, as if mother-in-law hadn't done the exact same thing to me for years. Sarah barely reacted. She was past caring. Then, just when things seemed to settle, mother-in-law sent out one last invitation. An event. A family-only gathering. This time, she included Sarah and me. Like nothing had happened. I knew exactly what it was. A test. See if we'd come. See if we'd pretend everything was fine. Sarah responded first. If we come, it's because we choose to. Not because you suddenly remembered we exist. Mother-in-law didn't respond. At the event, mother-in-law acted like everything was fine. Like she hadn't spent years excluding me. Like she hadn't thrown tantrums when things didn't go her way. She knew she couldn't manipulate us anymore. And for the first time, mother-in-law was the one feeling like an outsider. A year later, everything had changed. Sarah and I were thriving. Mother-in-law had faded into the background. She was still around, still technically part of our lives, but she wasn't the controlling force she used to be. Just another relative. One who had finally learned she didn't get to dictate how we lived. She never apologized. Not once. But she also never pulled the same tricks again. And that was good enough for me. Sister-in-law, though, she never got over it. She refused to acknowledge my existence. If I was at a family event, she stayed on the other side of the room. She still acted like I had ruined everything. It would have bothered me once. Now, I couldn't care less. Surprisingly, father-in-law changed the most. He started talking to me separately from mother-in-law. Small conversations at first, then real ones. He'd never been the bad guy, just too scared to challenge mother-in-law. But now, he was making an effort. It didn't erase the past, but it was interesting to see. Sarah's relationship with mother-in-law would never be the same. She still saw her mom sometimes, but the blind loyalty, gone. Mother-in-law had lost her grip. She knew it too. No more guilt trips. No more passive-aggressive comments. She had learned Sarah wasn't easy to manipulate anymore. Then, right before the holidays, mother-in-law tried one last move. She invited us to a family-only Christmas dinner. It seemed innocent, until I noticed something. She didn't invite my side of the family. Sarah and I both saw it for what it was. A final attempt at control. A way to see if she could still dictate which family mattered. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask why. I just replied casually. "Oh, sorry, we already made plans with my family." Mother-in-law was stunned. For the first time, she was the one being excluded. The irony, delicious. Sister-in-law didn't take it well. She ranted to anyone who would listen that I was taking Sarah away from them. Sarah didn't even flinch. She just responded, "I'm not the one who created this situation." Sister-in-law had nothing to say, because it was the truth. And just like that, mother-in-law stopped trying. She finally understood. We weren't playing her game anymore. She could either adjust, or she could fade into the background. She chose the latter. Sarah and I came out of all of it stronger than ever. No doubts, no second guessing. She backed me completely. And the rest of the family, they saw the truth. They realized mother-in-law and sister-in-law had been the problem all along. Then, months later, I got an unexpected text from father-in-law. "I think your presence in this family was the best thing to ever happen. Thank you for standing up to them." I read it, smirked, and left it on read.